Message is being broadcast by the Department of Defense of the Republic. At 2 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, multiple unidentified objects were confirmed to have entered Earth's atmosphere.
Discovery Houston, 20 seconds to LOS T-drift.
Contact, nice to be in orbit. The first message that comes to you is you are a divine being. You matter. You count. You come from realms of unimaginable power and light, and you will return to those realms.
The vast stretches of the unknown and the unanswered and the unfinished still far outstrip our collective comprehension.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Broadcasting from Forest Tower Studios, all the way from the Deep South. Now, here is your host, Joe Root.
Good evening. I'm Joe Roop, and this is Lighting the Void. We are live on KTLK Digital Broadcasting, The Fringe FM, and I'm having to make some real fast adjustments here. We had a little bit of a power issue. I know on The Fringe FM, I'm fixing the sound. Give me just a second, guys. So I had a tree fall down on my power line outside, and I'll talk to you about that here in just a second. Tonight, the topic of discussion is voices in your head, right? So voices in your head, are they God, hallucinations, elementals, demons? Are you crazy? You know, a study shows that all of you have heard voices in your head at least one time in your life, probably from childhood. And then the doctors say that it fades away, but if it doesn't fade away, that you have a problem. And I don't believe that, not for 1 second, but it is the topic of discussion tonight. Again, I do apologize for coming on an hour late. I had a little bit of an issue, and the Reverend Dan Lopez is here with me. All the people in the world to talk about voices in your head, I think this is the guy to talk to. It's the Reverend, right? So let me just tell you what happened real quick, and this is my fault, and I feel like an idiot. Now, before the show, I was trying to come up with a topic tonight, and I'm glad we're talking about this because I had some pretty crazy voices going on in my head. And I had to get on the phone with the ex and talk about the kid and all this stuff. And we start having brownouts. So I'm thinking, what the hell is going on? That's just great. Right before the show starts, we're having brownouts. And then finally, the thing goes completely out. So I call the power company and start cussing them out and assume it's their fault and everything and yada. And they actually drove a truck out here and said, there's nothing on our lines or anything. It's not it. I thought it was the internet at first, but regardless, this is what happened. The studio is hooked up to the main pole out here on the property, and there's a certain spot where that plugs in at, and a huge limb fell down on it, and it moved the power to where it was barely touching. And we had to go out there and move the limb, cut it up, and move it. And so it was really my fault. So I was jumping up and down for nothing, all because I had crazy voices in my head, and I missed an hour of broadcasting. But either way, thank you for joining us. You can follow, like, subscribe anywhere on the web is Lighting the Void, Facebook and Twitter. We do not have an Instagram account. I want to say thank you to Eric Markham, my partner, the program director, Jeremy Scott, Tim Doyle from UFO Seekers News, Vance Nesbitt from Stranger Than Fiction News, and Jeremy and John Jeter from Paranormal News. That's where we get all this content from. It just comes in from a mass quantity of different places. But this is what I wanted to talk about tonight, because some of you have talked about this. We've talked about psychic attacks, right? The nature of psychic attack and how to defend yourself from those big, scary things. And I never even thought for a second that we should be discussing maybe the voices that you hear in your head. All of you know that I also produce shows, and I'd produce John Polk's show. I produce Suzanne's show, a few podcasts as well. It's kind of limited. I don't have a lot of time to do it, but, if you're looking for a producer, hit me up. I've got a couple of spots open for that. But anyways, a lot of the topics of discussion have been this CE5 and contacting ETs And I had a question. I asked Sue Walker, I said, when you hear the voices from the ETs, is it audible? Do you hear the voices like you would if I heard you talking to me? And they kind of explained it like, you don't actually hear the voices as if they're in the room. So then I was trying to understand the nature of telepathy. And I really got to thinking about this. We've all heard voices in our head. It's like a scientific fact in psychology. They talk about it as if we have an issue. This is, and I was just doing a little study on this. Dan heard it before the show. This is the way they look at it. They look at it as children hear voices. They tell their parents that they hear voices. Mommy, Daddy, I heard a voice. It was really scary. It's just your imagination. Go back to sleep. Children grow out of it. If you don't grow out of it, then you have a psychological issue. Sometimes they call it schizophrenia. They call it all kinds of different things. But you and I, we may actually consider it's a different thing. I would like to think that the voices in your head are not just something that your brain is doing. That's my entire point here. And I want to know that for sure. I know elementals do this kind of stuff. Daskalos has talked about it. And the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, they talk about the voices that you hear that don't always come from you. Don't, answer every voice that comes inside your head. So there is no doubt about it that it happens. And it happens to us adults as well. Dan and I have talked frequently about the subject, about how we hear things knocking, whistling.
Mind explosions.
Yeah, exploding head syndrome. But these voices are happening to people. And what I think is a lot of times is that people don't want to admit it, right? You don't want to go around and tell everybody you're hearing voices because they're going to put you in a padded room. Nobody wants to be in a padded room and called crazy. And I've brought this up a few times. I don't like to name drop on this podcast, especially when it's personal. But on the broadcast, I think it's hard to tell these stories sometimes without name dropping. But let's just say I had a friend, and we'll call the friend's name Sheila, right? That's not a real name. And she used to help out the station, and she's still really a very nice girl. And she was into Reiki. And she did these things with Reiki. And she called me. Well, actually, her children called me one night and said, my mother is hearing your voice in her head. And I said, what? My mother hears you talking to her. And then she got on the phone and she said, Joe, tell my children that these things are real. And I said, well, spiritual warfare is a real thing. Now, she went on to tell me that she was doing some type of meditation and chakra meditation, but the next thing that she knows that she says that she could feel one. I'm trying to recall it here, so I'm stuttering a little bit, but she could feel one vibrating, but the other one wasn't vibrating very well. And then all of a sudden she heard a voice in her head, and it was me telling her that this was all a big prank and a joke, and had her doing crazy stuff. And long story short, her family takes her to the hospital, and they had to medicate her for a little bit. Now, she's not crazy. She's a normal girl. She's not crazy. I know this, and this is why it bothers me, because I know she's not crazy. She's not manic depressive. She's not schizophrenic. But sometimes I wonder, when we tap into these things, should we be doing it without protection? Sometimes I wonder why you guys ask me about psychic self-defense so much. It's one of the biggest questions that you guys ask me, is psychic self-defense. And I know why, because you guys you have the same fear, don't you? You don't know if you should be playing with stuff, and I don't blame you. We talked to Dr. Richard Allen Miller. This guy's a genius. I mean, he's got 4 or 5 things going on in his mind at once, and he wants to talk about it all in a matter of 5 minutes. But, he did tell us that the first thing that I would teach anybody was, either the magic circle or some type of psychic self-defense. And I think I understand why now. I think it has to do with what we encounter. Jason Quitt came on the program and said, don't assume that just because you're in the spiritual world that there aren't things there that are trying to mess with you or trick you as well. Now, that's pretty damn scary. Now I understand why most people just don't mess with it, It's just not worth it. But you still have those moments in your dream state. Some of you actually do hear voices. And if you do, call in and talk to us about it. 1-800-588-0335, right? The phones work, by the way. But I haven't heard an audible voice in my head in a long time, except unless I was dreaming. That's the only time I've heard it. Or when I'm in that hypnagogic state, I've heard it before.
Right, in between, yeah. That was the last one that happened to me.
Is that the last time that happened to you? What happened?
Yeah, but about a week and a half ago, was in the hypnagogic state, and so I'm walking, and as I'm walking, all of a sudden, this voice that was not anywhere near, it was like one of those. It was not mine. It was like, what did he say? It was like, yo, or something like that. And I was like, what the fuck? It was like, as if you're walking down the street and somebody in the manhole cover screams out at you. You're like, what the hell is that? But it was loud and it was like right in my face. I was like, you got to be kidding me, man. I was like, don't pull that crap.
So there's a guy in the chat room also. This is something else to consider too. Open Think Podcast is in the chat room. Welcome to Lighting the Void. I'm glad to have you here. But he's dropping links in there, and he's talking about mind control from the government. That there's patents on these, U.S. patents on mind control machines, like one of them's called the hypnotic inducer. An apparatus
that's what
for
Robert
producing
Allen Miller
visual
was
stimulation. That's crazy, man.
But that's
Right.
what Robert Allen Miller was developing. He was developing all of that stuff with the God helmet and all that stuff for projecting voices into your head. And what they did was they had it transverse over microwave freaking patterns, and then we were able to get it so that they could single you out, and
Right.
they can direct it right to you instead of over a broad area. Yeah, they mess with you good.
There are these real patents on all this stuff?
Yes.
Auditory subliminal programming systems, an apparatus for inducing frequency reduction in the brain, hearing device microwave system, silent subliminal presentation systems.
Yep.
All right. Okay. Well, then that tells me right now that our brain is. I just got through watching a video where psychiatrists were talking about kids that, they'll hear voices after they're born into their childhood and into their toddler years, but it goes away. And that's normal. What are the voices?
and if it doesn't seek help, I'm like, that's not the help you're looking for.
What are the voices that are talking to the children? Did you hear voices when you were a kid?
Yes.
I did too. Sometimes I used to lay down and I thought I could hear people whispering and talking. I remember it used to freak me out, man.
You ever hear it more when the fan is on?
Yeah, right. When the ceiling fan is on, you hear that at first, and I don't know if it's my mind making it sound like people are whispering, but then you start to hear like real conversations.
Mm-hmm. Full on.
Let's see, these patents, this is I need to look into this more. We can do a show about this one day, government mind control. But I'm more talking about, my point is, I'm more talking about in the spiritual realm, in the psychic realms. The kind of things that Daskalos would talk about from a hermetic nature, like Thoth, who would say, don't assume that every voice that comes to your head is you. Not all thoughts are your thoughts. Now, that's a scary thought. Not all thoughts are your thoughts. That's a pretty scary thought. Where the hell are they coming from?
From without.
I've never really considered that people that were diagnosed with schizophrenia, manic depression, and things that heard voices. I've never considered till not just too long ago that maybe they aren't crazy. Maybe they're gifted. But they're not going to tell anybody. If you heard a voice right now in your head, would you run and tell everybody? And no, I'm not saying that the people that are doing the CE5 stuff are crazy, because I don't think they are. I don't think Sue Walker's, I think she's actually speaking with something. What she calls the Ponte. I think everybody that does this stuff is, but
it does take a measure of practice to get to differentiate between what's coming from without and what's coming from within.
It's right. It's hard to figure that out. And what I'm saying is we shouldn't be doing this stuff without the proper protection. You shouldn't just go on an event, whether you want to go astral travel or you want to do a seance or something, without protection. Have you done a seance before, by the way? I've never done that. Dan, you ever been part of one?
No, not per se. The Ouija board, but that was about it.
Do they do protection before the seance starts? Surely, right?
They normally, but people that I was with, no. Which I
just
thought
come on, demons, bring them on in.
Yeah.
It
was not a good one. I told you about that event. That was not fun.
There was a book that I read that kind of changed my life, and it changed it for the good. And I've talked about it before. It's called Conversations with God by Neil Donald Walsh, which is a man that claimed to have spoke to God, who got I would say a more reasonable message delivered to him. And he did automatic writing and wrote out everything God said to him. And that book really did change my life. But through the whole book, you would ask yourself, is this just him talking in his head, or is he really talking to God? And every time you had what was weird about reading that book, though, is every time you had a question, be like, okay, if you're God, then do this, right? Or answer this. And this voice had an answer for every question, a good answer for every question. I would even play it on the air if I didn't think it was copyright infringement, but you should check it out yourself. The first book, he did 3 books, but the first book, Conversations with God, the voice comes and tells him, one of the first questions I had to ask, it said, if you're God, you're supposedly God, then why don't you just come down here and show everybody that you're God? That's a reasonable question, right? You ask that voice, then, right? Why don't you just come down and tell me, show me you're God? And you know what he answered? He said, I've done it many times through many people. And every time you either say that the person's crazy, or it's a trick, or it's magic, or it's the devil. That's your best one, you say. It's always got to be the devil. Now, how do you rebut that? He's right. But maybe this is more about my issue with it, because when I wake up in the morning, I think about what I'm going to talk about that night, and I think about so many different topics that are on my mind. And then I really literally carry on a conversation with myself. And if you ever just stop, just for a moment, just stop and say, who is aware, like Jim Carrey said that one time, who is it that is aware that I'm thinking? Then you start to feel really weird. You should try it sometime. Have a real conversation with yourself. The next time you hear a voice in your head, ask that voice, who in the hell are you? Then things get crazy. I know you've done that before, Dan.
Yeah, I keep waiting for the response, and because most of the times it's like, you hear, especially when I was young, you would hear things like, hey, or you would hear, hey, Dad, or Danny. And I'm like, okay, you got something more to say than that? Because, I'm kind of busy here.
Queen Babylon said the Satanic Bible changed my life. I've been living better ever since. That's funny. Oh, she's being sarcastic, but there's everybody's, we were talking about this yesterday about thinking for yourself. And I think that's why I wanted to talk about this, because it's not easy to think for yourself when you got all the voices in your head, plus all the voices of, everybody else. And then you don't know if it's your own thoughts or not.
Right.
And then you've got esoteric books that tell you these are not your thoughts. No, wait a minute. I'm sorry, I'll take that back. What Thoth says is if you have a thought and you find that it doesn't come from your heart, then banish it. That's what he says to do. Banish it from you. Well, why would you banish something unless it's bad? I hope some of you aren't really just diving right into this occult and esoteric stuff without protecting yourself. Now,
of course they are.
Of course they are. Why not?
They are. I believe they are. I've been in a lot of forums on Facebook, and these people are just going full bore into
really?
it.
Like, what are they doing?
Yeah, and you go to tell them about it. They're trying to develop all of their, their mental capacities and all the clairs and everything like that, and they're doing all these rituals and whatever, and they're reading these magic spell books and blah, 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 and they're going right into it. And you tell them about, protecting and everything like that, and they get mad at you, and they're like, don't limit me. I'm like, oh.
Right. But do you ever think that some of these people listen to the voices so much that they're just gone, right? And what I mean by that is
I know a few people who do that.
They believe what they're saying so much. Like they make this narrative. Like I've had that happen where a friend of mine thought everybody was lying in the world but him. And he really believed that, right? Yeah. That everybody lies but him. And I'm like, listen, man, that can't be, number one, that can't be true. But really think about what you're saying. And I kept trying to have a conversation with him, and there was no getting through to him. No, everybody lies. I'm the only person on this planet that doesn't lie. What? Or is that you really speaking that to yourself? I feel like that people have these things, man, that attach to them and then just start talking in their ear, right? Telling them, making them paranoid, saying, oh, this person's doing this and this person's doing that. And you don't want to listen to it or believe it. I can tell you this for an example. Don't do that stuff until you have proof of it, because that is a demon, man. That's something. That's something that's
that was
really
just like
evil.
you were saying. That was your friend on the roof who looked down at you and said, "The devil's got you, boy."
Right. Exactly.
But then again, you got to remember that the guy was saucing it up a whole lot, and they don't call it spirits for nothing.
Yeah, he did drink quite a bit. He smoked a lot of weed and he drank a lot. And I think he did a little meth back then. He was a good guy, though. He was nice. But
Drinking does it the worst.
Just a freaky moment, in time when.
Did that really happen?
Yeah, man. Like I'm having anxiety. I look up and he's sitting on the scaffold on this gable, and he said, "Hey, Joe." And at sunrise, right before sunrise, it's kind of dark. You can barely see, right? It's a little freaky looking anyways. And he looks at me and he says, "The devil's got you, boy." He wouldn't say anything. It's just not him. And we've been talking about this stuff all week. I think that's why I wanted to talk about it tonight, that we can't trust some of these voices. And then if you hear voices in your head, I don't think you're crazy. That's probably the two biggest points to make. But the knocking and the whistling, all of this stuff, man, I really want to figure that out. But I don't want to go down that road, Dan, without proper protection. Not anymore. Not after what I've been through.
Be wise.
But it seems like
helpful.
When you protect yourself, nothing happens. And that's kind of boring, too.
Yeah. Or it takes longer.
Right. But when I was a kid, man, I used to see things and hear things, and that I knew they were real, like almost like the sixth sense. And I'd go to my dad and I'd tell him that I saw this thing, it was real, and I know you don't believe me, but it's really real, it's really there. And you, instead of like the comforting thing you would get, they would, kind of laugh at you. Oh, that's just your imagination. All you got to do is not think about it, and it'll go away. It's so freaky. And you go lay back down. Now, don't turn on the lights. Don't turn on the fan. Let's just sleep in complete darkness and silence. Some of you that can do that, I'm very impressed with you. Can you do that, Dan? Complete darkness, complete silence. I still can't do that to this day.
It depends on my disposition at the time.
What do you mean?
Well, sometimes I'm not as anxious, and sometimes I am anxious.
Well, if you go to...
The condition doesn't make it very easy.
Oh, yeah, I got you. Okay. Well, when I grew up, that's how my pop was, right? Mm-hmm. Don't make a sound, don't turn on any lights, nothing, don't even turn on a fan. And I would hear whispering, like, conversations. I would see stuff move. I would see things in my room looking at me, And I know I'm not the only one, because when I go to places like Amazon Video or not Netflix, but Amazon Video and YouTube and all of these other places, they have, what do they have? They have those where you can just listen to a fan, right? You ever seen that, Dan?
No.
Yeah, they have that where you can just listen.
Oh, I think, yeah. The soundscapes?
Well, yeah, and Amazon Video has, and I don't even know why it's on video, but you can just listen to a fan blow. You can listen to like a box fan.
The ocean.
And it even has, on the box fan, it even has where you can turn it up, like medium, fast, or slow, different videos for that, so you can sleep.
Mm-hmm.
But you know where that comes from, right? That comes
the wishing sound of the womb.
Well, that comes from when you were a kid, that you couldn't sleep without some kind of noise going on, because you couldn't sleep in silence. And last night we talked about, with you, when you and Eric was on here after Brian went off the air, do you remember when you were born? Do you remember what that was like? And I think that you're so tapped into the spiritual realm, and you're so sensitive to all of these realms, that it's so crazy you just don't remember it. You ever looked at a baby's eyes after they're born? They're just kind of going crazy and looking around, and you have to really get their attention, like, hey, or make a face, or just, do something stupid, and they lock in on you, right? And they look at you, and now you got their attention, and they'll reach, and maybe they'll giggle, just depending on how old they are. But if you ever just sit and watch them while they're awake, laying on their back, kicking and moving, I bet you money they hear all kinds of stuff. And they're seeing all kinds of stuff, and we just don't remember it. Anyways, if you're crazy, cool. That's what I think happens. But if you think that, if you hear voices in your head, if you've had conversations with things, I want to hear it. And yes, I am interested in what Open Think Podcast put on here, as far as all of these patents for mind control weapons. It's pretty freaky stuff. I'm here at the Reverend Dan Lopez. It's Open Lines Thursday night. We used to call the show the Moon Bat, but we're talking about the voices in your head. Are they real? Are they God? Are they spirits? Are they elementals? Try and figure it out. We'll be right back. Stay with us.
Or is it your mother-in-law?
Yeah. Is it your mom?
Out there.
There's something out here.
And so are we. KTOK Digital Broadcasting, The Fringe FM.
All right, everyone. This is Justin from the UK. Excuse the chitty. If you're into the Fringe and you want to hear the brass tacks, my old china plate, Joe Roop and his guests on Light in the Void will open your mince pies. You need to shut your northern south and use your 10-speed gears and listen to them bubble. You could hear a Barry Crocker, no Brussel, but he ain't no holy friar. Anyway, you beat a Barnaby Rudge and take a butcher's.
Hey, Fringe FM listeners. Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or no Wi-Fi available, you can still listen to every minute of the Fringe FM by calling 701-719-3971. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. Saves your data plan and no extra cost if you have unlimited minutes. Call 701-719-3971. That's 701-719-3971. Listen to the Fringe FM on any phone, anytime, anywhere.
Are you intrigued by Paranormal Talk Radio? You'll love the new Paranormal Radio app from TalkStream Live. You'll find a great selection of talk shows covering UFOs, ghosts, strange phenomena, and much more. Download the Paranormal Radio app now and start listening to the very best in paranormal talk entertainment, including the network you're listening to right now, the Paranormal Radio app. Free in Google Play and the iOS App Store.
Your home has needs. It needs a healthy, dry environment all year round. Start by getting rid of the worst air in the basement and crawl space, where the problems begin and make the whole house sick. Introducing the new Smart Wave Ventilation Unit. It has advanced technologies to continuously reduce moisture, mold, and odors, and expel radon, gases, and pollutants. And now, Wave units include carbon monoxide detection to automatically expel air at a high rate and send you an alert. It also has an app so you can remotely monitor the conditions. Wave is a comprehensive, maintenance-free, affordable solution that will transform your entire home. Protect your home and family with what it needs. Give it a new Smart Wave Ventilation Unit. For more information, call 888-717-WAVE. That's 888-717-WAVE. Or go to dryhealthyhome.com. That's dryhealthyhome.com.
Wave Home Solutions for a healthy, comfortable home.
Greetings, galactic community. This is Suzanne Ross, host of Sci-Spy Radio, every Wednesday evening from 5 to 7 p.m. Pacific. Join me for this brand new show featuring a revolutionary new genre, Sci-Spy, merging science and spirituality to give us answers to the greatest mysteries of creation. Together, scientific discovery and spiritual revelation reveal the truth about who we are, where we came from, why we're here, and where we're going. Tune in to Sci-Spy Radio every Wednesday from 5 to 7 p.m. Pacific and discover the truth for yourself at thefringe.fm.
You're listening to Lighting the Void Radio.
Hi folks, it's a holiday season with hope in the air. Things to look forward to and no time for despair. Health can be a challenge, and so can the mail. So Get the Tea wants to help you by giving you a sale. Buy 2 months of Super Tea and get 1 month for free. No limit. That's buy 2 months of Super Tea and get 1 month free. That's a savings of $35. Where? GetTheTea.com. That's GetTheTea.com. Scroll down on the front page and find the buy 2 get 1 free ad. Click it and save. Orders over $100 get free shipping. Send the gift of life. Change tea at GetTheTea.com. We have many non-GMO organic supplements just waiting for you. This holiday season, enjoy health and Thanksgiving with GetTheTea.com. Want to call us? 928-308-0408. That's 928-308-0408. GetTheTea.com is a proud sponsor of Doing What's Right. That's GetTheTea.com.
Want to know what's on the Fringe FM? Check out our schedule at thefringe.fm.
You're listening to Lighting the Void. The call-in number is 1-800-588-0335. If you would like to text, you can text in at 501-777-5631.
So the discussion tonight is voices in your head. And it is a proven fact that most children hear voices in their head when they're born, and that kind of goes away. And I'm bringing this up because we've talked about CE5, we've talked about astral travel, we've talked about telepathy. Now we've discussed military mind control weapons. And, you know, a cool thing just happened is Ryan Gable from the Secret Teachings just chimed in. What's going on, Ryan?
Hey, not much. I'm just enjoying the conversation, as always.
Well, I'm hoping do you have an example of this? Like, did you ever have, like, voices that you hear that you had to get rid of? Or, I can't remember. I just don't have that happen to me.
I can't recall any that I, quote-unquote, had to get rid of, but I've had experiences throughout my whole life of things that those around me would tell me that's just your imagination, like you explained earlier, or that's just all in your head. But you know what? Even thinking about that, maybe philosophically speaking, if it is just my imagination, if it is just in my head, it's still manifesting because it's still something that I'm experiencing. So that argument that parents use is kind of an argument that doesn't really have much thought put into it. It's very dismissive. Of course, not just parents, but anybody who doesn't have these experiences or believe them. What you guys said earlier, I think you said it, Joe, is that we've all had these experiences, I think, at some point, maybe at least one time, even when we were young, if we don't remember them. I think it's as natural as breathing. It just might not be something that we commonly associate with living, because it's not necessarily something that we see every day. We don't necessarily hear it every day. We don't necessarily feel it, taste it, or touch it every day. And those are the five senses that we interpret the physical world through. And if we don't interact through one of them, then we tend not to believe that those types of things are real.
Yeah, we just want to, rub it off, shuck it off like it doesn't matter, But I do remember when I was a child how freaked out I was, I'm talking about not just a little scared, terrified, because I knew it was so real. Mm-hmm. Running to my parents or my dad or my stepmom, whoever he was dating at the time, and saying, look, this isn't in my imagination. It's really real. Come back here and look, come back here and check it out. And it was never a big deal to them. I mean, if I think about it, man, I lived in horror most of my childhood when I was in my bedroom,
I think I might have too. I'm sure some listeners have had that same experience. But you know what? Maybe it's the parent not wanting to feed into this because they believe that it really is delusional and they don't want to make their kid, quote unquote, insane. I think there's a balanced way to approach it. I mean, if I had a child who came to me and said those things, I probably wouldn't excitedly say, well, let's go see if we can contact them, but I wouldn't dismiss it either. I'd find a balanced way to address it.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
That's my opinion.
But I don't know if you heard the story of my friend that got hospitalized for it. But see, she was tapping into, I got to be honest with you guys, and please don't be mad at me when I say this, but when people used to tell me that they did Reiki and healings from long ways off and all, I just never really believed it. I got to be honest with you. I never really. I mean, I would kind of shine them on, be like, wow, that's really cool. Because maybe they can, But deep down, I never really believed it until I started going back and thinking about all those different experiences I had and that others have had. And then I started thinking about the character of my friend. And she's not going to lie to me about this stuff. And it was so real to her that, that her family had to get involved. And some of the stuff that she said that she was hearing me say in her head, I would never say to her. So I got to think, man, well, maybe it was a demon or some type of elemental. Dr. Stylianos Ateshlis, if any of you ever study that guy, he's a really good Christian mystic. He was probably one of the masters that lived on this planet. The Theosophical Society used to talk about, in their books, they would talk about these secret masters that lived amongst us. Well, he was one of them. Right? He was one of them that taught them things because he could heal people etherically. But you don't hear that much about him unless you're familiar with Daniel Joseph, because he wasn't selling books and selling things and trying to get his name out there. He just wanted to live his life. But he talked about elementals that would attach themselves to you, that would put thoughts in your head, and that you could never really kill them. You could get them away from you, but you had to banish them. And I was like, wow, that's really cool. And then I read in the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, which I don't know where that came from. I think it's another channeled book or something, but Thoth says the same thing. If you hear a voice and you know it's not yours, or if you have a thought that doesn't come from your heart, then you need to banish it, not just play with it or just say, well, whatever, you know? Yeah,
I've read many occult-styled books. I'm not sure what to call them. They're not black books in the sense that they're grimoires, but they're occult-themed, esoteric books from the 1800s, early 1900s on the subjects of magic. And usually I'm pretty good at remembering where I read something. So on break there, I was flipping through a few books and I could not find it, but I do recall, I know it was on the left-hand side, the left-hand page of a book that I read, maybe the first couple pages within the last year. And it was a chapter on this very subject, which is why I was trying to find it to reference the material. And it was about how your thoughts are living manifestations. Now, that's not something that I've read for the first time in this book that I couldn't find, because we know things like the Tibetan thought forms called the Tulpa. We know that Native Americans and various people throughout the world, different cultures throughout probably all of recorded history, have had stories of thought formations, and through pure concentrated thought, they believed and perhaps were able to bring physical creatures to life. So if you're able to bring a physical creature to life, let's just say in concept, your thoughts probably can influence others, just, even without being able to verbally communicate. But since we verbally communicate with each other, or at least interact with each other on a daily basis, I don't see why it's so far-fetched to believe, because we see, I believe, direct proof of it every single day, as when we interact with another person, we are influencing their thoughts, because the thought is not the process, the thought is the final product. Thinking is a process, and if you take a machine that's being used to manufacture a product, and you put certain ingredients, certain elements into it to manufacture that product, you're going to get a different product depending on what kind of ingredients and what quality the ingredients are that you put into the machine to make the product. So our thoughts are a product, and if other people, for no nefarious reason, we're just interacting with each other, maybe we're arguing with each other, maybe we're having a conversation like we are tonight. When we interact with somebody else, we're interacting with their point of view, their perspective, with their thoughts. And this is kind of like a spider web and almost like an endless cycle. But their thoughts will influence our thoughts, and it will produce a product that will be a combination of our point of view mixed with their point of view, which will be mixed with the point of view of others who have influenced them, and so on and so forth. So in
it's
that
like
way,
a really bad cause and effect thing that happens.
Yeah. I didn't mean to really ramble into it there, but you're right. It is more of a cause and effect. I think that sums it up.
Well, I see what you're saying. And Cynthia's asking in the chat room, are you talking about monkey chatter or audible voices? Well, as a child, I remember audible voices and whispers and things, but I'm also talking about monkey chatter. I mean, is there really a difference just because you hear it audibly or in your head? Look, I've had thoughts that there's no way in hell that I would think them. There's no way in hell I would act upon them. And most people won't admit what I'm talking about right now, but I've had thoughts that you think about something that you would not do. You just wouldn't do it. And a lot of the times it's evil stuff, right? Like stuff that's wrong, really wrong. And you have to stop yourself and go, wrong. Yeah, you know it's wrong, right? Like you have to stop yourself and you go, there's no way in hell I would do that. There's no way in hell I would even think about stuff like that. So why is it in my mind right now? And then you actually try to banish it out of your head. And the funny thing about those stupid thoughts is they like to play a little game with you of will. You actually have to will those things away. Most of the thoughts we think about every day, they just kind of come and go. But those I've noticed those ones that come, like, say, for instance, and I'll give you an example. I could be standing in a line about to order a pizza or something, right? And I get a little upset, and I'm like, man, I'm just standing here for a long time, and a thought comes in my head, well, you should probably just stab that guy in front of you and then tell him to give you your damn pizza. And then you have the visualization. You're like, I wouldn't do that. I would never do that. I'm not a violent person. Why did I have that thought? And then you're like, get out of my head, right? Go away. And as soon as you try to get it to go away, then it plays a game with you. It wants to stick around.
I think that's a part of who we are. And
you don't think it's a spiritual thing?
Well, it is. I think it's all of those elements wrapped into one. I think that when we talk about spirits or demons, I think those things are manifest through the people who might have perhaps not exercised their will so well, and maybe they do stab that guy in the back and scream and say, give me my pizza, because people have reactions like that on a daily basis: shootings, stabbings, robberies, rapes. Stuff. Yeah, people do act on those thoughts, and I think the manifestation of those actions is a version of a demonic possession or a spiritual, maybe a nefarious spiritual possession. But I don't really think in those cases it's always some external, if you will, external demonic element. I think it's really, truly, in my opinion, it's a part of who we are. It's like the old Native American story of the two wolves. One is, well, you know that story. Yeah, one is kind of corrupt and one is good, and which one wins is the one that you feed, or which one survives.
Yeah, I get your point. I do. I just know that I'm not the only one that's had those. I've had people admit it to me, that they've had thoughts of even worse things, like things that enter their mind, like you talked about, rape and blah, 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 and they're not going to do it. They're not that type of person. They're not capable of it. I mean, I guess everybody's capable of it, but they're not, they don't act on things like that. They're not that person at heart, their soul, but this thought comes in and toys with them. And I used to think the same thing, like, really, I mean, I kind of agree with you. I know we have thoughts about all kind of like, ooh, what a pretty picture. That's a pen, or I'm hungry. We have thoughts about stuff all the time. But I think those weird thoughts like that creep in because I think this whole place is a spiritual battlefield. We just don't think it is. We think there's two separate things, right? Like there is and there isn't. There's the physical and the spiritual, and they're two separate things. And they kind of co-act with each other, but they really also interact with each other constantly. If that makes any sense.
It makes sense. And in terms of interacting, you guys ever walked into a room and you immediately felt kind of, for lack of a better word, a negative kind of heavy energy, and you don't really know where it's from, and then you kind of interact with a few people and you realize, oh, it's that person, they give me a really bad feeling? I'm sure everybody's experienced that at one point in their life. Yeah,
I have, man. I've met people like that I've never met in person. Just by hearing their voice disturbs me. You know what I'm saying? Like, because I know it's fake, or there's something that I just don't like about it, and I don't want to be around it.
I think it's that person. I mean, there's two reasons I brought that up and used that as an example. Number one is because it's that kind of a person, and maybe they really are a good person, but for some reason you have trouble interacting with them, and in their presence they make you uncomfortable. So that person to you is someone who drains your energy, and in that sense they are very vampiric. So we could take this conversation into that subject as well. But on the subject of thoughts, the way that you interact with a person who makes you feel that way, who makes you feel kind of negative or down, or maybe they do put negative thoughts in your head. Negative is a very general word, but to put a negative thought in your head by interacting with them, then that person kind of acts in a way as a more, again, for lack of a better word, maybe a more of a demonic or evil influence. Think about like when you were younger and maybe being around. I didn't really interact with crowds like this, but I knew friends who had other friends who were like this, who were always kind of edging them on to do things that were illegal or that were kind of immoral or that just were wrong. And I never really did those kinds of things, but other people fall victim to that because they're ushered to do so by people that act as if they are the demon in the ear, and they physically act that way. And maybe the reason for that is because they are influenced by those forces, or those forces aren't necessarily these external spirits that are roaming around in the spirit world on this battlefield, as you say, but maybe the reason that we attribute those characteristics to such demons or to such angels even is because that is and has been throughout history our way of providing a face to understand those perceived voices that we have, whether they're a part of us or not a part of us. Does that make sense?
Well, it does. It does make sense, but there's a thing that I can't stop thinking about, is the fact that, like Dan and I were talking about earlier, that when I was a child, I did hear voices, and they still sound like some of the same whispering and voices that I hear now in my head, audibly when I was a kid, but now I hear them in my head. When you go into the astral realm, like Jason Quitt had talked about in here, that there are types of beings that like to vamp on your energy, and I guess you could call them dark. I've heard people call them dark clouds. I've called them like Rorschach looking things, just black figures that seem to be about you sometimes. But when you're a kid, you could hear them, I think. And when you learn to shut them out, because think about it, your parents train you to shut them out. I remember physically having to teach myself how to go to sleep, think about something else, even if I can literally hear this stuff and see it, to tell myself that it's not real. It's almost like we train ourselves to tune it out. And now It's monkey mind. It's just in our head. It's in the brain, right?
We're probably dealing, I don't like being definitive, but I'd absolutely say that we're dealing with more than one type of phenomena here. I think we're dealing with multiple things, be it external spirits or demons or devils, whatever you call them. That includes angels as well. Angels are as prone to evil as demons are prone to good. And I think that we're dealing with a variety of different things that we often try to summarize as being one type of experience, when really we're experiencing multiple things at once. We're experiencing everything that you're explaining, many things that I'm sure some listeners are thinking about that we haven't brought up, and we're experiencing things that we probably can't even begin to really, with our perceptions and our senses, begin to imagine. And that's my opinion. I think we're dealing with a lot of different things all at once.
So do you're starting to kind of understand, because I know you've always studied like symbology, the subconscious, all of these esoteric symbols that affect our behaviors and affect the way we think and stuff, right? So there's something going on in this realm that I feel like there's a battle going on. Like Richard Allen Miller, when he came on here, he was talking about how everything in our life is a metaphor for a larger truth. And it didn't make sense to me at first, but he's like, well, think about like and this was weird when he brought this up. He's like, think about a tick or a chigger or a mosquito or things that literally have to suck your blood to survive. Why do they even exist, right? Well, they're a metaphor for a higher energy, right? They represent something that's actually real on a higher level. And he didn't really get into explaining the whole thing because it was a huge topic, but he's got like hours and hours of metaphysical stuff that goes into this. And it really freaked me out hearing that stuff, man, because I consider myself somebody that knows how to psychically protect myself from these things. And yet I'm still in this battle all the time with the voices. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Have you ever talked to a gentleman named Wayne Bush?
Yeah, I remember having Wayne Bush on. Yeah, he came on this program, Tricked by the Light. Yeah. Yeah,
Tricked by the Light. Yeah, Wayne Bush and I had an interesting conversation about this. Before I mention anything about that, though, I wanted to go back to what you said about the mosquito. And I think what he was referring to in more occult or magical terms is one of the 7 principles of Hermeticism, which is the law of correspondence. And the law or the principle of correspondence is, of course, the Hermetic axiom, as above, so below, or as below, so above, right? So the mosquito, like as I talked about with Wayne Bush, we had a conversation about being tricked by the light. And there are creatures in our physical world that trick us by light. And we talked about the anglerfish. The anglerfish deceives by light. And so we just kind of went through the different creatures that trick by that means, using the anglerfish as an example, and using that as a metaphor, using that as a microcosm. We can apply that to the Hermetic principle of correspondence in the as above, so below. The anglerfish is so below, and then as above, in whatever capacity that might be, spiritual, etc., etc., we probably do find creatures or spirits or things that exist outside of our visual perception that, like the anglerfish, trick and deceive by light, which is Wayne Bush's whole theme, tricked by the light. So I think that's very similar to what your other guest, excuse me, I forgot his name, but your other guest had mentioned to you about the mosquito. I think that's the same principle.
Yeah, Richard Allen Miller. Now, wasn't Wayne Bush the one that had Art Bell all freaked out about going to the light? It was a trick, or that was I think Wayne Bush and Whitley Strieber and then Art Bell. Because I remember when they were all talking about it. Either way, that's besides the point. But yeah, I get what you're saying. But why would things be symbols here? It's almost like, why hide it? You know what I mean? If this is a symbol for something larger, why can't we just understand it? You know what I mean? Why do we have to learn it later on? Okay, this is a symbol for something larger in the universe.
Well, maybe it's because... I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, yeah, well, I'd love to hear that. But I don't like I love studying hermetics, don't get me wrong. I love studying the esoteric and the occult and learning all these things. But it seems like you got to dig. That's the crappy thing about being an occultist, I'll just tell everybody, is that it's not a blessing that you have to dig and dig and dig to figure this stuff out. And then when you do figure something out, you're like, well, why the hell didn't they just tell you that, you know?
Yeah, well, I mean, I have a perception of why that might be. I mean, I think you also know at the core of hermetics and occultism why they don't just come right out and say things. But, you know, in the sense of examining why we have to learn things on our own, I think the real reason that is because of experience. You know, you could tell a kid, and I don't mean necessarily like a youthful kid. You could tell someone who's youthful in mind, somebody who doesn't necessarily have any interest in these subjects until later in life. You could inform that person and give them all of the details and say, this is what this means, this symbol means this religion has this at its core, etc., 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 for any topic, any subject. And unless they go and discover that for themselves, no matter how much they study, it's doubtful that they'll be able to maintain or retain, maybe that's the better word, retain an understanding of those things, even if they can regurgitate them and they can quote certain authors and they can repeat ideas. I'll give you an example of that. There are a lot of things that I study. I am constantly reading. I think one of the crappy things about being into the subject of occultism is that there are just so many good books to read. That's my problem.
Yeah, that's a lot.
There's a tremendous amount of material. And when I go through and read things, there are certain subjects that I found so difficult to understand for so long. And I'll give you an example of a particular subject as well, and that is the Kabbalistic tree of life. I'll tell you what, Joe, it took me years to even get a basic comprehension of that thing. And one day I was reading this book, which had nothing to do with the Kabbalistic tree of life, but there was like a very small chapter, and the guy that wrote the book put just a small image of it in there. And after years of studying this, the way that this guy explained it in just a few simple sentences, it clicked with me. So all of the other people who I had read, including Manly Palmer Hall, who's my favorite author, all the details that they had given or all the somewhat simplistic explanations they had given, all of that was totally irrelevant to me. It never clicked. It never made any sense. And then one day, as I continued to research it and dig into it, it clicked. From my experience of researching it is how I came to fully understand and comprehend what it meant Otherwise, nobody really could explain it to me and just say, this is the answer. And I said, oh, okay, we have to experience things. I think that really is the core and the root of a lot of the things that that we interpret to be meanings for life, if that makes sense.
Are you familiar with the C5 protocol, the close encounters of the fifth kind that a lot of people are talking about now?
You know what? I've heard of that, and I think I heard you on a recent show mentioning that, but I am unaware of the details.
Right. Well, I want to ask you about that. I know we got to take another break here, but just your opinions on it, because I've never talked to you about this, and so if you're cool with it, I know I hope Dan's still here. He hasn't really chimed in much. You still here, Dan?
Have I bored him?
No,
bored him tonight?
No.
No.
But I do want to talk to you about this because I'm very curious about the CE5 stuff, and I trust your judgment on things. But anyways, we got to take a break. Ryan Gable has actually jumped in and joined us. If you want to call in at 1-800-588-0335, that's the call-in number, toll-free from the United States or Canada. You can text in at 501-777-5631. You can also email the show at contact@lightingthevoid.com. This is Lighting the Void. I'm Joe Roop. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
This is Sammy. Join us in the Deep South as we're lighting the void with Joe Roop on the Fringe FM.
Okay, nurse, let's get this man to the ER stat.
Right away, doctor.
We see this every day. Heart attack or angina pain due to blocked and clogged arteries. Chelation can remove obstructions or blockages from arteries and help avoid painful and expensive surgery. Now there's Angioprim. It's a liquid oral chelation product that you take with juice. You start to feel the results fast. Angioprim increases blood flow all over the body, and that means more energy and strength to take on the day with less aches and pains. 60 years of research has gone into chelation, and Angioprim is the result. A safe and easy way to unblock your veins and arteries from buildup that slow circulation.
Paging Dr. Jones. Please report to the emergency room right away.
Log on now for a special radio offer from Angioprim. That's angioprim.com/radio. ANGIOPRIM. Angioprim.com/radio or call 877-882-7221. That's 877-882-7221.
From Studio 303, it's the Stranger Than Fiction News right here on the Fringe FM, bringing light to the stories that surround us. What black holes really look like? Astronomers find that they do not resemble donuts, but are actually fountains. New observations and simulations show black hole donut is really more complex. Researchers say dynamic structure has three gaseous components that swirl. Instead of a donut, it's more of a three-dimensional fountain, researchers say. You can read more of this article at the Daily Mail UK. And Roswell, New Mexico's place in UFO lore is being celebrated in a big way via an enormous new alien statue that towers over the city. According to local media report, the 22-foot-tall depiction of a green ET was installed on the city's main street earlier this week. The massive monument comes courtesy of a recently opened Dunkin' Donuts Baskin-Robbins that drew inspiration from Roswell's famous alien-themed McDonald's. The story was written by Tim Bennell. And another huge pterosaur is observed at the Vermilion River in Danville, Illinois. As the witness stood on a bluff looking out onto the river, he noticed a large shadowy figure gliding downstream towards him. As it got closer, the bizarre creature became more defined. He observed what he described as a pterodactyl gliding about 4 to 5 feet above the surface of the river. The witness estimated that the wingspan was approximately 25 feet as it covered half the width of the river. The huge flying being looked exactly like the images of a prehistoric flying dinosaur. Long beak with a long ray on the head, dark gray leathery skinned body, and wings. The long tail was flattened at the end. It made little sound, but cast a shadow on the river as it flew just below the height of the bluff. The water swirled as it glided past. The beast continued gliding downstream until the witness lost sight of it. He stated that it never flapped its wings. The witness's first reaction was to get back into the house and tell his wife what he had seen. This story is posted at phantomsandmonsters.com. And time for this edition's fun fact. The machineal tree is nicknamed the Tree of Death, but for a good reason. Touching it can leave chemical burns on your skin, its fruit is toxic, and if you burn the bark, it can cause blindness. And that wraps it up for another edition of the Stranger Than Fiction News right here on the Fringe FM. I'm Vance Nesbitt, anchor and news sorcerer.
Magic, the occult, history, health, news. These are just a few subjects discussed on my radio broadcast, The Secret Teachings. I offer unique and objective perspectives on new and old subjects alike, while welcoming guests and presenting my own research with no filter. Visit my website for more information and to subscribe to my archive at www.thesecretteachings.info, and find me on The Fringe FM live Monday through Friday, midnight Pacific, 3 a.m. Eastern on The Fringe FM.
Welcome back to Lighting the Void. I am your host, Joe Roop, and we are talking about the voices in your head. What are they? Where do they come from? What is the source of them? And we have discussed earlier about schizophrenia, manic depression, things like that, the voices you used to hear when you were a child, trying to get to the bottom of this. And I brought up with Ryan the CE5 stuff that a lot of people are talking about, contacting aliens. And I have the book by Sue Walker here, which I've talked to her quite a few times, her and Reverend White Otter. I've also had other guests on the program that talk about the CE5 thing. And so these people, when they interact with aliens, they'll either get a download or something strange will happen to them, or they'll have dust on their pillow, just wild stuff that happens to them, right? And a lot of them hear voices or whistles or just strange sounds. And there's so many different things about the CE5 stuff that I think is cool. And I would love to talk to an alien, by the way. I'm not afraid to talk to an alien, okay? But what I am afraid of, just a little bit, and I think it's a rational fear, is that I know from personal experience and from a lot of the occult books that I've read, and Ryan's read as well, and I'm sure Dan, that there are things in these interdimensional and astral realms that are very deceptive. You know, they pretend to be certain things, and you have to check them. Jason Quitt talked about that here Tuesday night, that he would say a certain name or mantra or an Egyptian name, which is kind of funny, right? That they knew this stuff back then. So the entity would reveal its true nature. And my big point is there's so many things that have been created by voices in our heads, like you brought up during the break, Ryan, about the oracles of Delphi or Delphi.
Mm-hmm. Delphi,
everybody...
Yeah.
This is literally somebody that heard voices that rechanneled the voice, and weren't they on drugs, or they were fasting?
Yeah,
and they were inhaling certain fumes and all kinds of stuff.
There were several oracles. It wasn't just at Delphi, but the Pythia on her tripod at Delphi was probably, or is still probably, the most famous, at least famous Greek oracle. And yeah, there was a fissure in the earth, and she'd inhale the noxious fumes, and then, despite some of the paintings and drawings and the engravings of the Pythia, the python there that gave the oracle, from the stories that we get, it wasn't necessarily a beautiful sight. The woman would then usually convulse and go into a trance-like hallucinatory state, almost as if she was schizophrenic. In some stories you read about convulsions, and then the convulsions themselves and the utterance of whatever it was that you could interpret that she was saying would be interpreted as being words that were being given by God or the gods or some divine being. And that's a very common thing that you find not just with the oracle at Delphi or some of the other oracles who did not use hallucinogenic substances, fumes, or drugs or anything like that. We've always looked for ways since the beginning of time, whether we're throwing bones or we're using tarot cards or we're looking at the stars or we're divining through entrails, or, I mean, I was reading recently about some things I've never heard of before, divination by spears, divination by sticks, putting sticks on the ground and letting a horse walk over them, and then looking at where the horse steps and then determining what that means in relationship to your question. I also read about this form of divination that was the forerunner to the Ouija board. It's a really famous form of divination. I think it's pronounced electromancy, something along those lines. I've seen it spelled differently. And basically what you do is you get together and you basically draw out, the different letters of the alphabet, and you put some grains, some seeds in front of each letter, and then you let a bird go, and the bird goes over and pecks the seeds, and then you write down the letters, and to whatever your question might be, you get an answer. I mean, we humans have tried so many different things to divine the future, and I find it interesting that if you were to look at like the Immaculate Conception, you could classify that as a form of close encounter, and now you have people that are actively seeking to contact extraterrestrials. And I said this to you at break, I don't mean this in a demeaning way, I just mean this as an objective observation. I personally don't see people trying to contact extraterrestrials as being any different than people that pray to God and ask for signs from God. Should they do X, Y, Z? Should they go on a date? Should they apply for that job promotion? And I don't really see it any different than the very negative, dark aspects of these types of things, where people will consult the black books and the grimoires in order to communicate with demons and Satan, in order to ask for treasures and wealth or love and power. I think it's all really the same thing, and it's just a matter of the culture around it that determines whether it's acceptable or not.
Yeah, and it's funny because in Leviticus, when they talked about all those bad things that you shouldn't do, right? It's all witchcraft and sorcery. But it was okay for the Hebrews to cast lots. That was okay.
Yes. Good point.
And you can cast lots. Our divination's okay, but just don't mess with anybody else's. And
that's like what
it doesn't make sense at all.
That's like what the Pope said when the church formulated the modern Halloween celebration. The Pope said something to the effect of, I think actually this is a quote, I think I have the whole thing memorized. The pagans, they are no longer to sacrifice beasts to the devil, but they may sacrifice beasts to God. So you can't practice your pagan beliefs if you worship these other gods, but you can do the exact same barbaric acts as long as they are direct towards our God.
Well, I want to, if someone will do this, and maybe I'm crazy, but the next time that you have a weird thought, and this, I guess you could call this monkey chatter, right? A thought that tells you to do something you wouldn't do. I just wouldn't do that. Just stop and just try to quiet your mind and ask that thought, who are you? And see if you don't start to feel just a little weird.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the last time
I did that.
Have you done that before?
I heard you say that earlier. Well, I heard you say it earlier, and I did it. It was weird.
Yeah, you start to feel a little weird, a little anxiety raises up, and you start to feel what feels like inside of you is a little bit of not fighting. Fighting's not the word for it, but
I think I'm being watched.
Yeah, you start to feel like, it gets real quiet in your head, doesn't it? But it's not a nice kind of quiet, I can promise you.
Have you ever seen the movie Black Magic with Orson Welles?
No. Orson Welles made a movie called Black Magic, and I've never seen it.
You've never seen it? I'd never seen it. I just happened to find it at the library, never heard of it, and I watched it. It's a really long movie, and if I remember correctly, I think he kind of had the power of suggestibility, basically getting people to do what he wanted them to do. So that might be an interesting movie for listeners to get a copy of. It's an old black and white Orson Welles film on this subject.
Right. I got to check that. That's something I'm going to do tonight. I got to check that out. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's a good movie. I thought so anyway.
I just think that in order to I want everybody to be safe. I feel like I'm responsible, to be perfectly honest with you, because we've talked about magic, astral travel, divination. I think we talked about scrying a little bit on here. Magic entails doing sigils, scrying, divination, ritual. Even in the Golden Dawn, they would say when you met entities in the astral realm that they would present themselves as angels of light. But you learned to either vibrate a certain angelic name or trace a Hebrew letter to test that angel. And even then, if you read in their books of the Golden Dawn, and this is a Rosicrucian system, right? So it goes way back, that some entities would present themselves as friendly or angelic, and they would give them the signs, the LVX signs of Osiris, Apophis, right?
Mm-hmm.
If that entity could do it back, then it was friendly. If it wasn't a friendly entity, it would banish them, or they couldn't, or they would go away. And I'm thinking, whoa. So these cats were going in the astral realm, giving off ancient signs that, it's, LVX is LVX. It just looks, it all fits together too, though. And the entity couldn't respond to it. Don't you ever wonder?
Didn't know the gang sign.
Yeah, didn't know the gang sign, right? Or the original Hebrew language looked like something that caveman drew, but then it went from that to all of a sudden this Babylonian style, which is really, if you do your studies, it looks like the Babylonian flame letters, to a more magical looking text that they use for everything.
Yeah. You know what's kind of, one thing that's disturbed me, not many things disturb me anymore of these subjects, but one thing that has disturbed me a little bit on the subject of magic and demonic possession is, despite what my personal or anybody's personal view might be on the Catholic Church, and I mean, I know a lot of people who follow me over the years, they know what my opinion is, but the Catholic Church and the way that the Catholic Church gives permission for exorcisms to be performed, I've always found it really kind of disturbing that, yeah, we've seen movies and you might have heard stories, but the very few very well documented cases of people who have literally in some form been possessed by something, these are sometimes people that they don't speak other languages, and they'll speak fluent Latin and they'll do it in reverse. Wow. I can't say the alphabet in reverse in English. So I don't know how somebody, I couldn't imagine, Joe, I don't think you know Latin, you're possessed and all of a sudden you're speaking Latin fluently backwards. That's always kind of disturbed me. There is there are really powerful forces that are at work that go far beyond just manifestations of attributes that we give to spirits or entities or human actions. There really are things that are far darker than that interact with us.
So that's freaky to think about.
It's really freaky to think about, man.
But if that stuff's really going on, then I think you should know it. I'm a total advocate of psychic self-protection, and I know Barbara in the Fringe FM chat, she wanted a link to some of the stuff, and I've been working on the new newsletter for a few days now. And I apologize to you guys about that, getting that stuff out, but just keep in mind that I'm producing a lot of shows, running a station, and having to do this show, so I kind of try to do that stuff when I have extra time. But
it's hard work. Give Joe a break. He's working the best he can. It's hard work.
Yeah, thank you. But I just dropped the link in there. So the actual link comes from the Golden Dawn site that David Griffin runs. The link to Psychic Self-Defense is in the Fringe FM chat under the conversation that I was answering Barb in, but go ahead.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. No, I'm sorry, Joe. Go ahead.
I just was going to say that most of the real good esoteric and magicians and occultists, the ones that had morals, that's the first thing that they would teach you.
Mm-hmm. Well, we do anything else with protection. Usually, even if it's just recommended, we drive a car with a seatbelt. We cook dinner. We don't put our hands on the stove. You know, people have sex, they wear condoms, people do things that are protective and doing anything within these realms, if you will, astral or otherwise. You'd think logic would dictate that you would use some type of protection. I mean, Dan, what did you say earlier? You see people on Facebook and they're just kind of jumping right into it.
Oh, yeah. And I'm like, whatever happened to safety first?
Yeah. Oh, you know what? That's kind of my point. What I see, I've talked about this on my radio show, The Secret Teachings, several times in the past couple of weeks, just kind of as a, I call it a sticky note, just a side sticky note to other subjects. And it's not really causing harm to people. And in fact, it might actually be helping some people if both parties believe it or if one party believes it. But, you know, you have people that believe that if they take, I've seen all kinds of stuff, guys. I've seen people that take snakes and they let snakes crawl on them and they think that heals them of cancer, or I don't know. And hey, maybe it does. But those kinds of things, the way that I perceive it is like you get this idea that crystals are energetically powerful. So you think crystals are energetically powerful, that must mean that if I rub them on my body, I'll get energy and I don't need to drink, an energy drink. Yes, it's those kinds of things that it's the literalism of it that causes a lot of problems within our fields of study. And it's not necessarily a bad thing per se, but it's the literalism rather than the open interpretation of the metaphor. But I think that there's a necessity for the literalism. The necessity is people that don't fully have the developed ability to understand what they're doing and what they're dealing with should not be moving to the next level, if you will.
Right.
They shouldn't be, if someone doesn't understand how to apply the brakes in a car, they shouldn't hit the gas and drive on the interstate.
Right. And, you bring up crystals and stuff. What I was talking to Jason, the reason why I like Jason Quitt so much is because he can describe, the energetic stuff when it comes to crystals and chi and all that in a way that I can understand. And he relates it to alchemy, and the more magicians I talk to, they talk about, this really is all about energy. And I said, and I asked him on the show, I said, well, a lot of people talk about crystals. They buy these crystals, they wear them, they do all this stuff. And I sometimes I don't buy into it. So he explained to me about how we use crystals and technology and that they do harness energy. But he also explained to me that, it took him a long time of doing these teachings of chi or whatever he was doing, qi gong, before he could actually even start feeling the energy. And that's one thing that I remember doing Golden Dawn ritual was that you don't start feeling the energy right away. You're like, okay, I'm doing this stuff and I'm vibrating names. Nothing's happening, right? But there is an energetic nature to your body that builds, and builds. And those are like they're taught in Tantra. They're taught in the Kundalini teachings. They're taught in the Western ceremonial systems. They're taught in everything, this energetic body that you have. And it's in the New Testament. It's all in there. It's where everything's hidden,
I bet you that a lot of listeners have maybe experienced that and don't even know it. I feel like I experienced that only, in my experience, only when I deal with books. Like I usually can feel what book I should pick up and what book I should read. And usually one book leads me successively to the next book, like the end of the chapter, and one book leads me to the beginning of a chapter or the beginning of a book that I just come across seemingly by random. I think everybody's probably experienced that in some way. That is energy. I think anyway. I can feel it personally.
I used to do that at Borders bookstore.
Yeah.
Just feel across. Yeah. Whatever one jumped out, that was the one.
Yeah.
And there usually was like the right information at the right time. It wasn't like, something that I was searching out or whatever. I was just like, I know I need the next thing right now.
And it just comes to you, and that's what you need at that moment. It's not what everybody would go and stand in that aisle and find, but that's what you need.
This is a thing that I believe, like Erickson, there's like, I don't know what people's desire is to study the occult and magic. Well, the original Western ceremonial teachings of magic, the Rosicrucian system, it wasn't to get a new car or a new girlfriend or, scribble something on a piece of paper and chant something and get what you want. It was to come into communion with your higher self. This was Crowley's whole trip. That's all they wanted to do, was they studied enough to figure out that this person on earth is kind of like an avatar of who they really are, and that they had to progress through initiations and energetic transformation and alchemy to come into communion with their higher self. And it was easier for Westerners because of the way we were raised to do it in a magical Western ceremonial type system, rather than in the East where they meditate for days on end and defecate on themselves and everything. We weren't brought up that way. So they designed this system, and it works. And if the reason why it works is because people are still doing it today. Now, granted, in magic, when you start learning, the influence of energy and the planets and the Kabbalah and the subconscious and the Hebrew language and yada, 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 the Hermetic principles, we can go on. You start learning that stuff, then you start realizing that you can influence your life in positive ways. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but you can also do things that aren't so good, like psychically attack somebody or do black magic. And it comes with a price. I mean, there's two sides of the coin and everything. And you make that decision. Don't think because black magicians are out there manipulating people that they think they're not going to get karma for it, but they will.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad that you brought that up and you explained it in a way that prevented me from rambling for 5 minutes trying to explain it, because I wanted to segue from that into another thought that I've been preserving here for a few minutes, and that is the subject of the basic concept of an angel and a demon. And I'm telling you, if you read on these subjects, older books primarily, the famed authors of these types of subjects on occultism, etc., you'll find consistent references that angels are demons and demons are angels in many different ways, that angels can produce horrible effects and demons can produce very wonderful effects, that the demon is often a leader to what is good, that the demon is there to test you, and if you overcome the test, then the demon transforms into an angel by our perception of an angel, and the angel then helps to guide you further. That the demon is a barrier. It's like if you join the military or you join a sports team, they're really, really going to push you and break you, more so in the military, but you got to be in shape. You're not going to play on a sports team if you're unable to run up and down the field or back and forth on the court or skate to center ice without panting and breathing really heavy. You got to be in shape, and they're going to push you to be in shape.
Yeah.
And I think that the demons are kind of like that. The demon's like a really strict coach, and they might not seem like a great thing, but they're actually very necessary forms of evil. But with what you said, Joe, how you explain that beautifully so, then there, of course, are always those people who want the shortcut, and hence you get the black books where horrible operations literally, in a lot of cases, would be performed, where, for example, there's the famous, you familiar with the Black Pullet?
Right. Yeah, the Black Pullet. Yeah, that's a pretty well-known grimoire, actually.
Yes, and that one maybe isn't as dark as some of the other ones, but it requires you to take the black hen that has not laid an egg, go to a crossroads at midnight, utter an incantation, and cut the bird in half, and then the devil will appear. And then you can ask the devil for whatever you want, money, power. Usually it's money. One of the things about a lot of these black books, a lot of the grimoires, and although they're still usually interpreted by the average person, including myself until I actually read them, is that they're shortcuts to wealth or to power or to learning, and that they're very negative. But one of the things I learned, especially reading the Keys of Solomon, is that that's there, yes, but I think there's a lot more to the grimoires. I think that a lot of the grimoires are very metaphoric in nature too. Like there's two examples. The first example is something that Eliphas Levi wrote, and something that Edward White wrote about as well. And that's the usage of the word kid. A lot of the grimoires say that you must use the skin from a virgin kid in making your magic circle.
Oof.
Now, that might sound like a horrible, horrible thing, and people run away from that, guys. But if you look up and do this, I'd encourage you to do this. Look up in a dictionary the word goat, and you'll see under the definition of the word goat, you'll see kid, right? So I think it's metaphoric, and I think it's symbolic. And also, the other thing I wanted to mention about that, the second point, is when you summon, I think usually it's one of the lieutenants of hell or the representative of Lucifer. I believe you pronounce the name Lucifage Rofakal. And this character comes to you, this entity comes to you, and the way that you summon them to appear in not a grotesque form and to appear without, horrible smells or sounds or anything like that, when you make the pact with this demon for power or usually for wealth and for treasure, the demon says, I cannot grant you these wishes unless you give your soul to me in 20 years or 50 years. It's usually one or the other. And depending on which black book you read, there's usually a method by which to command the demon for which they will agree, as long as you give them a piece of the treasure that you acquire, and you do so every month at a certain time, they will not claim your soul. And so the magician's able to actually exercise power over these infernal spirits. And so you kind of have a difference there between like witches and people that interpret the Sabbath as this gathering of Satanists and devil worshippers, where they're subject to the devil. The magicians, black or otherwise, they have power over the devil in a lot of stories, in a lot of cases. So there's a lot of ways to interpret it, and I find that to be the most important thing with no matter what we study, are the open, objective views that there are more than one interpretation of what we're reading and what we're having an examination of.
You got to get people to be open and objective. I think that's the hard part. And there's people out there, in my opinion, that aren't being very helpful. Like this Lucian Greaves guy. I want to get him on the show, but in my opinion, bringing the statue of Baphomet, right, or Baphomet, however you want to pronounce it, to my hometown in Little Rock to make a statement against the 10 Commandments that they put up. I mean, I get what you're doing, but you also call yourself the Church of Satan, and you're using a symbol that the Knights Templar used, and you got all these, people on the other side of the road that don't even understand the symbol, saying, look at that statue of Satan and demon, and then they'll never understand it because this guy is from the Church of Satan and wants to make a statement. And in his mind, he thinks he's doing something good. But in my mind, the cause and effect of what he's doing is making it worse. You're making people be less objective because you're not explaining to them what that symbol really means. You're just showing people that they don't really know, and you're kind of laughing about it,
That's the theatrical.
It's stupid.
It's theatrical. I talked about that on the Secret Teachings a couple of times when I did my Sabrina show a couple of weeks ago, and how that temple or the Satanic Temple, they're actually suing, or they did sue the makers of Sabrina, claiming that in the show they used this statue of Baphomet and that it brought negative attention to their religion or to their temple, which was just ridiculous. It's just a publicity stunt. And so they settled with this guy. I don't know how many millions of dollars. They were asking for $50 million because of the association with the Temple of Satan and with the Sabrina show. And so they settled with them, and in the process of that lawsuit, I covered some of that on air because I addressed the symbolism and I addressed the nature, whether it was in the TV show or in the Temple of Satan or the Satanic Temple, or I call it the Church of Hell. I don't know what these people believe in.
Yeah.
And one of the things I came across was I went to that guy's Twitter page, and I don't know if the guy really is just incompetent about what he uses as his symbols, but they have this Baphomet statue, as you said. And as you know, Baphomet is it's androgyny, and the Templars used it, of course. It's a positive, negative, black, white, male, female symbol. And if you notice, if you compare Baphomet with depictions of the devil, specifically El Diablo, the devil on the tarot card in most tarot decks, you'll notice a couple of things. You'll notice that the devil holds the flaming torch downward, which Manly Palmer Hall says is to light the infernal world. That's the false light of the anglerfish, as we mentioned earlier. Then you also have the horns of the devil. The horns of the devil are actually curved and pointing downward. You have the pentagram on the devil's head, which is reversed. It's descending, and some other features that we could go into the details of if we had more time. But if you look at Baphomet, it's the very opposite. The flame is between the two pillars, pointing upward. The pentagram is ascending, pointing upward, and the two horns are ascending and pointing upward. And there's usually a variation in the wings of these creatures too, Baphomet and the devil, where the devil's wings are descending. So the point here is, I don't mean to ramble on, but the point here is, if you look at this guy's Twitter page, his profile picture is him with a pentagram upside down on his head, and then he has a close-up image of Baphomet, which is supposed to be this satanic Church of Hell symbol.
It's not a satanic symbol. It's not an evil symbol. That's what pisses me off about it.
Exactly, and it's not an evil symbol because Baphomet has the pentagram ascending, while this guy is using a pentagram on his head descending. I don't think he actually knows what it means.
Probably, he may not, and I'll never know until I talk to the guy. But I get that these, like I said, I get these people want to do these political movements, but 9 times out of 10, they're doing more harm than good. So when we talk about things like trying to understand voices in your head, people don't even want to go down that road because of stuff like this, Well, I already know where that's going to lead. It's going to lead to me joining this little cult over there, putting up a satanic statue, so I won't even mess with it, And it's like, that's not what that statue is, and those people probably don't understand it, but they're putting it up because they're mad at religion. Can you not see that? They just don't like religion. They're just totally mad at it. And, you have to respect, and I know some people think that I'm anti-religious, but I'm not. I believe that religions are taken the wrong way, and people do crazy things like, I told you about this app that made for Muslims, Google made for Muslims to find all the blasphemers. They helped them make the app to locate these people. It's just crazy. But all religions to me are just doorways. In other words, they're just doorways to the mysteries. All mysteries are taught in all these religions. And even Christ talks about it. I gave my disciples, the keys to mysteries so they could heal people. They even did rituals to heal people. Think about it. Why did Christ rub his thumbs in the dirt and rub the dirt on the guy's eyes? Why didn't he just say, you can see? He had to use metaphors that were on this earth to get for the truth to come alive. The word is alive. I don't want to go down that whole thing. But he taught these things to his disciples, right? But when they talk about the mysteries in the book, everybody thinks because that they asked Jesus into their heart that they understand the mysteries. Well, I asked Jesus to save me, so I understand the mysteries. And it's like, well, that's fine, and you just want to leave it alone. But what if those voices that you're hearing, I think is important to discern if it is your brain, if it is monkey mind, if it is a good spirit or a bad spirit, maybe one of them's trying to help you. And now we've got people doing the CE5 thing, and I'm concerned just a little bit. Maybe it might not be an alien talking to you. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Maybe it might not be.
And even if it is an alien, it's not necessarily a good one.
Yeah, not all aliens have to be good too, right? I get that.
Yeah,
for sure. But
another thing about thoughts is that you think about this. If you just to go back to that Baphomet statue for a moment, and reminding us of the new Sabrina show, the remake, which is very, very, very dark, but very well done in terms of what they must have read to put that show together for when they have the Black Mass. Think about people that watch that, and back to what Dan said earlier about people just jumping into it with no protection. Mm-hmm. I can tell you for sure, if you go and you have a look at what's on television for children to watch, for adults to watch, Netflix, Hulu, and all the rest, and you listen to the music, like I did a big show about this singer named Poppy. Look at movies like Slender Man, for example, or even The Nun, where they've got the demon Valak. You look at these types of things, and I'm not suggesting, I do not believe that there's some evil influence and we need to run to the church and hide inside the church and hold up crosses and sprinkle holy water all over the place. I don't believe that at all. But nevertheless, people's interest without protection, like Dan said, in these subjects that then manifest into movies and TV shows and in music, and then that influences us. The thoughts that a lot of us have, even with something as simple as advertising or marketing, seeing colors and images, a lot of our thoughts are really not our own. Our thoughts are constantly being formed by external stimuli. And some of that external stimuli, in fact, a lot of it, if we're very much into entertainment and we're out in the world interacting all of the time, most of us are, is going to be influence that is artificial in nature. It's somebody trying to get us to buy something. It's somebody trying to get us to think a certain way. It's somebody using the mysterious element of what happens within the realms of magic and witchcraft and diabolism to sell a TV show, to sell a book, to sell a movie. And then people become interested in that, and they follow all of the trends that are involved with it. Kids eventually want to get a Ouija board, then they want to play with, they basically want to play with things that are not toys, and they want to do so in the most childish way. And teenagers and adults do that too. And that leads people to having imbalance. And that, I think, is the result of, I think it's the result of not properly and logically doing something and studying something and practicing something without the proper context, let's say. Imbalance, I think, is really the key issue here. I don't want to talk about demons or angels or God or the devil. I think all of that really is irrelevant. I think the real issue is balance. If we can balance things out, then things will be okay. But if we don't balance things out and we inundate ourselves with anything, we could inundate ourselves with Christian symbols and God, and then what do people that do that do? They believe they're actually talking to God, and people that inundate themselves with symbols of what they perceive to be the devil, they think they're talking to demons, Joe.
And that's a good point. Another thing about voices in your head, I had a discussion with the Lord the other day, and the Lord told me, right?
Yes.
But I played a clip the other day of this guy, and those Let's Go to Church clips where he, that preacher come up there and said, I knew a young man named Scott once. He was a smart guy, right? But that didn't help things, right? It didn't help things that he had a brain, that he was smart. And he was just, not taking God seriously. So I had a discussion with the Lord, and I walked up to that boy and I just hit him in the chest. Bam! And I said, Ben, when are you going to start taking the Lord seriously? I led that boy to the Lord right there. There's times when that's needed, right? That's what this guy's doing psychotic things because he believes that God told him to punch a child in the chest,
Well, here's another really great example. I'm going to be talking about this next on the Secret Teachings. Think about the trials, or the lack thereof, for that matter, of witches. All the thousands of women and some men that were put to death because they were thought to be witches. I even read a story that people were so frantic in England at one point, they put animals to death because they thought, not that the animals were demons who manifested as animals, but because this one guy, he owned a horse, and he taught his horse some tricks, and he loved his horse a lot. And because the other horses didn't know these tricks, the Inquisition put the horse to death because they thought the horse was a witch. It's the hysterical, uncontrolled emotional responses to things that people don't understand. It's the fear and the anxiety that builds up and manifests in a way that is, in a lot of cases, violent. It does a mob mentality. And one of the things I'm going to be talking about tonight that I think is such a really interesting relation to what you're talking about tonight on Lighting the Void, Joe, is what we think about a black mass or the witch's Sabbath, and what people had traditionally accused witches of, are all things that the witch, whether they were real or not, the witch didn't do, and the witch was not guilty of. The people that said they saw a witch at a black mass, saw her fly on her broom to the black mass, all of that was a manifestation of fear. What happened at the black mass was actually the result of what the common person thought was happening, not what actually happened. And likewise, the pricking of women and the looking over the body for the witch's mark and making them drink weird things before they were fully persecuted, and the things that were done to the witch to get them to admit to guilt are the very things or the very style of things that the witches were accused of doing to animals and people at the Black Mass. So the witches were truly innocent, and the people that persecuted them were the ones that were truly guilty. And this whole lore of witches and Black Masses and Sabbaths, no doubt that they did happen for real and people that mimicked them, but a lot of that is just pure hysteria, and it all manifested in a way as reality through what people thought was happening in the woods at night, what people thought was happening at their neighbor's house. Thoughts are very powerful, and if we don't control them with proper emotion, then it turns into a mob hysteria.
Yeah, and another thing, too, is, look, and I'll make this point very clear. I think if you, from my experience, if you're afraid of the occult and you're afraid of magic and you're afraid of those things, you're afraid of mystery teachings, they scare you, if you think you're going to be tricked or whatever, then the best thing for you to do is just don't mess with it. I mean that. Don't mess with it. Don't, you can have a happy life and even probably get to know yourself a little bit without ever messing with it. But for seekers and occultists, and keep in mind that the occult just means hidden, people that are really trying to find out the truth of things when it comes to esotericism and spirituality, there's no getting around it. You're going to have to go down this road. You're going to be led to this road one way or the other. And it could be through Eastern practices. You have to understand that the Kundalini teachings and the body of light, and you hear all the stuff about ascension and the diamond body. These are occult teachings as well. They're in the same category that leads you to the same place of divine union. So the only reason why the Western systems scare you because there are different methods. They're more practical. They're more energetic, people that do more things to make things happen, but they're still just using the same Hermetic principles, cause and effect, and all of the other principles involved. And that is why, for the most part, the people in secret societies and stuff like that still to this day don't really want to come out and talk about it because you think that they're trying to put a demon in you or trick you or something. So they just don't mess with you. They don't talk about it. They go off and they do their own spiritual practices by themselves. And a lot of magicians are lone magicians. A lot of them aren't a part of anything. They just do it by themselves. But what I'm more concerned about, right, and the topic of the show is, voices in your head, is, I don't think that the Ponti that they encountered are bad beings. From what all of these stories these people have said, they act like good beings. They act like they're peaceful beings, and they probably are. I'm just saying, no matter what you do in life, and I'm sure Sue Walker would probably agree with me on this, when you're entering these realms of your mind and thought and voices and the esoteric, it's always better to protect yourself. It's always better to do that because there are a lot of games going on, man. I believe that with my whole heart.
Yeah, anything we do, we should be sure that we have protection, whether it's in body or it's in mind. I mean, who's to say that a demon, a spirit, an angel, a ghost, that they can't deceive, that they can't lie? Humans do so. Many of these beings are believed to be humans that have passed on. So why can't they lie? Why can't they deceive? Why can't they have a little bit of fun? Maybe that noise that the so-called ghost is making is just a ghost playing a game or walking down the stairs and believing that it's still alive. It doesn't mean that it's attacking you. I don't like those ghost shows where they do that. They go in a house and they start banging around and then, something moves and, oh my God, they're attacking us. Or maybe they're just going in the drawer and they're getting a knife out to cut up some food. They think they're still alive. Why are they attacking you?
Or they get pissed off and they start going, if you're real, come out. I don't believe you're real, yada, yada. And then they get scratched. And they go, oh, it's a demon. Well, maybe you just pissed it off, maybe screaming in its face. They wanted you to get away from them. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, if I came in your studio, Joe, if I just came in your studio right now and started screaming in your ear while you're trying to finish the show up, you'd probably scratch me too.
Yeah, like, get away, right? Get away from me. But I totally think that it's perfectly fine. It's good to have a healthy fear of this stuff. And just like the guy showed me the links, this there's a reason. Think about it. There's a reason why they hid this knowledge. Since George H.W. Bush died, I know Clyde Lewis put out an article where they released all these CIA documents, right? What did these CIA documents show us? That the government was messing with mind control and remote viewing and psychism and all of these different things. What is their reason for doing it? Power, right? The secret societies and magicians kept it secret for that reason too, so it wouldn't get in the wrong hands. But it has. It's been in the wrong hands for years. But you can't dump them all into a bowl, all of them into that one bowl, because you got a few government officials, corporate big heads, and politicians that want to learn this stuff for their own reasons, like mind control and all, and they're doing it now. It's already here, apparently.
It's a lot older than just something that has been occurring in the last couple of years. It probably goes back to the woodpecker signal that the Russians were beaming with the assistance of the U.S. into U.S. homes, and different stories that just seemingly seem like science fiction, but at the very least they were experiments. People believed, whether in government or in some company somewhere, private enterprises, they believed that they could accomplish these things, and they probably did. I mean, in fact, I think even advertisers, there's a story I read several years ago. These advertisers were able to beam a signal into people's heads walking down the street promoting their TV show. I think it was in like Los Angeles.
Yeah, it's real, man. It is. And, John F. Kennedy spoke out against secrecy. But if you listen to that whole speech, it wasn't just about secret societies. There was a point to that speech. And John F. Kennedy, in my opinion, was probably the last good president we really had, right? Somebody that really cared about our well-being. And he wanted to go to space, and he wanted to understand things, and he was the truth seeker himself. He really was. But he got, his position allowed him to see into things that he probably shouldn't have saw and probably shouldn't have observed and been a part of, and he had to pay the price for it. But he wasn't afraid to fight for it. And I think if maybe he did find out some secret teachings and stuff, or maybe he just wanted to know, just like we want to know. But before he could get to that, knowing, I mean, think about it. You're the president. You can say, what's going on down there? And I want to look. And, for the most part, they got to let you look. Anyways, he gets shot. And everybody's got their opinions about why he got shot. But I think he got shot for several reasons. Because he stopped dark powers. He was trying to stop dark powers. He was trying to get in the way of everything that's evil that's going on in this world. And ever since his death, we've been trying to battle our way back. I haven't trusted one single politician fully that I could look at that was good since him.
You should trust yourself.
That's it.
Have you ever had any look into the Washington Naval Yard shooting? Aaron Alexis, remember that story?
No.
If anybody's interested in what you said was posted in the chat room earlier, I'm not in there, so I didn't see it. But in terms of like more government mind control, a lot of us have heard about MK Ultra. But when you look at a result of those types of programs, Aaron Alexis, who opened fire at the Washington Naval Yard back in like 2012, 2013, there's police reports of him. This was long before the shooting, where he claimed 3 people were following him. And this was very successive. He went from hotel to hotel to hotel, claiming people were following him. And I believe the wording he used in the police report was beaming, or maybe the police wrote this is what he told them. People were beaming frequencies into his head through the walls of his room and making him think things that he wasn't thinking. And when he went and opened fire at the Naval Yard, CNN reported this. I have the original article. He actually physically carved into the butt of his gun, "This is my ELF weapon." ELF is extremely low frequency waves, which are used to induce trance-like states like television. That was a very, very telling story, and very, very blatantly so, on the subject of maybe a Manchurian candidate, some form of mind-controlled shooter.
Wow, man. That's I believe it, And look, people want to blame everything on secret. It's all the secret society's fault. Hidden knowledge is hidden knowledge, okay? Let's look at, this is probably a bad analogy, but let's look at a hammer. A hammer is a tool designed to drive a nail, all right? What else can you use a hammer for? You can bash somebody's skull in with it, right?
Yeah.
So what do? You blame the carpenter or the guy that designed the hammer or that discovered the hammer because this guy got bludgeoned to death? That's a bad analogy, but I hope you get my point.
I use that analogy all the time. I also like fire. Fire can burn you. Fire can keep you warm. Fire can burn your food, or fire can cook your food.
Right, and I think that the thing is now that we know that these things are going on, right? So we know that that there's the government's using hidden teachings and all these different things against us. And if you want to jump up and down and get mad about it, let me ask you this. What can you do to fight it? Because if you don't know the occult teachings and the mysteries, do you think writing blogs and jumping up and down and everything is going to solve the problem? Sometimes you got to fight fire with fire. Sometimes you need good magicians and witches and pagans and people that travel the astral realm and interdimensional travelers to combat these things. But then again, if all of those things scare you, then just live your life and move on. But it doesn't mean that those voices in your head aren't still going to be there messing with you.
In that sense, Joe, we're all pagans, because the word pagan just means civilian, or it just means country people. And paganism was really considered to be the religion of the country people, those who were not part of the religious or state-run system. And that paganism could be the paganism as we perceive it of old, or the way that we live our lives today, to the standard status quo of government and religion today and all the various forms of it. People like us that are kind of nomadic in our search for knowledge, we still are pagans. We still are the country people. And those that don't understand what we want to do, which is simply to learn, they will burn us at the stake because they're both unaware and or scared of what that implies and how that threatens their power.
I think that is 100% correct. Well, listen, we got to end this thing. You know, guys, Ryan's show's coming up next, The Secret Teachings. Make sure you check that out. I want to thank you for coming on the show, Ryan. It was a nice surprise.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought it'd be better to jump in rather than just listen. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
You heard me sinking is what you did. You bailed me out. I appreciate it. Anyways, I
threw at the life vest.
Yeah, you did. And we'll be back next week, Monday night, 10 p.m., Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday night, 9 p.m. And this show was produced by the Fringe FM and cannot be rebroadcasted or syndicated without written permission. And music was by Chronux, Kevin MacLeod, Space Station, and Carbon-Based Life Forms. So see you guys next week. If you're listening live, stay tuned for The Secret Teachings with Ryan Gable. Good night.
On this program do not necessarily reflect those of the Fringe FM, KTLK Digital Broadcasting, its sponsors, affiliates, or staff. Listener discretion is advised. We told you weeknights on the Fringe FM are now even better, and we mean it.
Do it live!
Where else can you hear the best shows and the best talent? Kick off your evening with our newest host, Alex Exum, live at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10 Eastern. Hang out with me, Joe Roop, on Lighting the Void at 9 Pacific, midnight Eastern. Ryan Gable expands your mind on the Secret Teachings at midnight Pacific, 3 a.m. Eastern. We're bringing the heat every single night. Fire it up, the Fringe FM.
Yahoy there. This is Gigi from Shift Happens. And holy shit, you're listening to KTLK, The Fringe FM. Hey, don't you dare